one remaining ovary removed, adenomyosis, all this stuff coming out of me, and I was like, keep hoping that there's going to be a cure eventually. Fibroids, polycystic ovaries, total abdominal hysterectomy. God, please give me a bit of a breather. And in the end, it turned out I had quite a huge cyst, infertility problem, and I would be screaming. 32 medications. Instead of then bringing your womb out intact, they kind of...
This podcast contains discussions and visual references to chronic illnesses, including women's reproductive health conditions, as well as graphic medical imagery that may be distressing to some viewers. Welcome to the Silent Struggle podcast with me, Michelle Chan. Today's episode is one of a kind. I can say I met the real life superwoman. Today I'm joined by Karen, suffering from endometriosis, adenomyosis, been through over 30 surgeries, had a hysterectomy, and still have to have surgeries for the rest of her life. Before we start, I want to thank everyone for listening to this podcast. It means so much to me. So I've got a favour to ask. Can you please hit the subscribe button? I don't have a production team, so it's only me working tirelessly behind this. And it really helps me to continue to bring more episodes of Silent Struggles podcast. So if you can please hit the subscribe button, that would mean the world to me. So let's get started.
I'm Karen, I'm currently 47, I live with my husband and two of our younger children. Third one's at university and one lives on her own now. I'm non-working, used to work, used to have a great job, but had to retire early through ill health on medical grounds. So I haven't worked for about 8, maybe 9 years now. And that's purely because of all the gynae problems that I was having. I ended up having more time off sick than I was actually in work. Just surgery after surgery after surgery. And then obviously the recuperation in between. And then you'd get back to work, and within a couple of weeks, a month being back at work, all the symptoms have started again. So yeah, I was in a real vicious circle. So I ended up taking the early retirement, if you like, and I haven't worked since. So I think I probably started with knowing something wasn't quite right in my teens, because I had really erratic periods, not regular, not every 4 weeks or 5 weeks. They were just all over the place. I'd get a couple 1 month, then I'd have nothing for 6 to 8 weeks, then I'd have another really long period, like 10 or 14 days or so. And as a youngster, I didn't really question it too much. I just kind of thought, well, I don't know any different. This is how it is for me. It's fine. And then as I sort of got older and started trying to have children and things, that's when I realised, something wasn't quite right.
When you found out there was something wrong, what happened?
Yeah, so in my late teens and early 20s, I started having really, really severe periods, and not just periods, not just a 3, 4, 5 day bleed, on and off every day, pretty much bleeding of some description, and some days really heavy, like flooding. I'm going through pads and tampons within an hour, and then another, and then another, and I really started feeling that there was something more to it, and this wasn't normal. I was doubled over, I was crippled with pain, with having to ring ambulances, and yeah, really, really struggling. Nothing would help with the pain. I couldn't find any kind of painkillers that would touch it. So it was then that I started really having investigations and referred to gynecology. But by that point, looking back, I'd probably been struggling for a good sort of, maybe 8, 9 years. And I'd not really put 2 and 2 together. Nobody had ever suggested endometriosis to me. And obviously I had been back and forth to the GP, and I'd been on the pill back to back, so trying to mitigate the symptoms, if you like, which did work for a little bit, but not very long, and I was still spotting and bleeding through it. So it was only after I'd struggled for the best part of 10 years that I thought, actually, this really isn't right. I'm going to have to stand my ground and say something needs looking into. It was about then, and just back and forwards to the GP asking what they could do, not really getting anywhere.
What did they say to you, the GP?
I had a low pain threshold. I was exaggerating some of it, just gaslighting, really. But at the time, don't really know what gaslighting was. But they just put it back on me, saying, you can't possibly be bleeding that much, or you can't possibly be in that much pain where you're writhing on the floor and having to call ambulances for a bit of a period. They sort of were saying it was my take on it that was wrong, rather than actually it was as bad as it was. They thought I was playing it up a bit and laying it on really thick.
When do they actually find out that you have these
Yeah,
conditions?
endometriosis. So that was after I'd had my second child. So 2005, I gave birth to him in the October. Immediately after his birth, I was just almost hemorrhaging daily, losing huge clots and lots of blood. And again, I kept going back to my GP saying, I surely shouldn't be bleeding this much. After I know I've given birth, but I wasn't like this after my daughter, and something's not right. And it was only at the point I had a really huge bleed. I was feeding my newborn child, who was a few weeks old. I stood up to go and put him back down in his Moses basket, and I just felt this gush between my legs, and I thought, oh,
Mm.
that's not good. And it was literally pouring out of me. So I managed to put the baby down, and I'm screaming for my daughter, who at this point was coming up for 7. And I'm shouting her from upstairs. I'm going, Bethany, Bethany, because I was meant to be taking her to school. We were meant to be walking to school, pushing the baby in the pram. And I'm shouting, I'm like, call an ambulance, call an ambulance. So I'm in and out of the living room and down into the downstairs toilet, trying to put tissues between my legs and sit on the toilet. And there was all this, sorry to be really graphic, there was all this blood and clots coming out. And I thought, I'm going to have to save some of these clots and take photos of them so I can prove that this isn't in my head, this is happening. And I just didn't know what I was going to say when I got to the hospital, if they saw me again and were like, oh God, she's back again, this woman who,
How big
keeps
is the clots?
Oh, huge. Yeah, huge. Like as big as, the palm of my hand. Huge, big clots, big round
What did they
clots.
say when you got there?
Um, well, when my daughter came down, bless her, she was horrified, and she still talks about it to this day, because she thought there'd been a massacre, because there was blood all through the hallway to the living room where the baby was and back, and it was just. The ambulance came, and at that point I'd passed out, so my little girl was in a right state, bless her. She was worried sick, but she'd managed to ring a dad and got him to come back home, because he's set off for work by this point. It's like 8:30 in the morning, school runs going on outside, the ambulance couldn't get down the street. And they said to me, we've seen the state of your house. When did this start? And I was like, literally 5 minutes ago. As far as I'm aware, it was 5 minutes ago. It wasn't that long ago. So I had to wait for my husband to get home then, so he could be in with the baby and my daughter, so that we could then go off to hospital. And I got there, and they did loads of investigations, and they got me back into theatre, and effectively they used to call it a D&C. It's like an evacuation that you have when you've had a miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy or whatever. So they did that, and they said to me at that point they'd found endometriosis. So it was only pure luck. It wasn't because I was on a pathway from the GP and I'd been referred to a gynae and I'd had scans and I'd had tests. There was none of that. It was purely because I'd had this horrific hemorrhage after I'd given birth, and I ended up having emergency surgery that they found it then.
Wow. Because
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who has endometriosis, they struggle to get pregnant.
Conceive, yeah.
And
Yeah, so I was
you
fine
got
with my
pregnant
first
four
one.
times.
I was fine with my first one. Not too bad with the second one, although I did bleed all the way through the pregnancy with my second child. So I
All the
didn't.
way.
So I did bleed all the way
Yeah.
through my pregnancy. And in fact, early on in the pregnancy, I had a bit of a scare, ended up in hospital because I was bleeding a lot. And at one point, I thought I was actually carrying twins, and I miscarried one and kept one. I kept bleeding throughout, and they said I was at risk of losing the other one, because once your body's rejecting one, it's probably going to reject the other. Anyway, it's very lucky, and Zach came through full term. We knew we wanted another child, but we just couldn't conceive. We tried everything. We tried all the old wives' tales, trying to get pregnant. We tried all different points in my cycle. Nothing was working at all. So we did the ovulation sticks and all that, not measuring my temperature. And, you go to really desperate measures. And then we did eventually conceive, which was great. We'd been trying for a long time. Unfortunately, we had a miscarriage at that point, and we kept trying and kept trying, and eventually we fell pregnant again, but it was quite a long gap. It was sort of 4.5 years before we eventually conceived again. And at that point, I'd had so many surgeries for the excision of the endometriosis, because
How
it was
many?
known 7, 8 maybe. It was like a couple of surgeries a year. it was just rife. Yeah, was having problems with my
Oh, a
bowel getting
year.
stuck to the top of my vagina, and my ovaries would get stuck to the bowel, or I'd get cysts on the ovaries that would burst, and then the blood would be all trapped inside, and had all sorts of problems. So they kept going in and having laparoscopies. And after we'd had the third one, and we thought, right, we're not going to be able to have any more. They told me after I'd had Zach that it was going to be unlikely I would have any more because of the state of my insides when I've been for emergency surgery. But I was determined to have four, and I kept saying to my gynecologist, you've got to patch me up, you've got to make it happen. Ever since being a little girl, I always wanted 4 children. It's my dream. And very fortunate to have a really good gynecologist who I initially saw through the NHS, but I now see privately, and I've been under him for about 20 years now, and he is absolutely amazing. He's the one who's made it possible for me to have the third and fourth children. And I say that to him all the time. And I said, I know it sounds wrong when I say you're responsible for my children. I said, but you are responsible for them being here. Without your magic touch and all the operations you've done over the years, it just wouldn't have been possible. I've had blocked tubes. He's unblocked my tubes. I've had, say, cysts on my ovaries. I've had endometriosis, widespread. I don't just have it within my pelvic cavity, so I have it on my bowel, my bladder, my intestines, and it's not just in that area where my pelvic organs are, if you like. We had the third child, and then after that he was like, right, let's go on, try the coil for a bit, see if the coil helps with all the bleeding and the pain that you're having. So, prior to that, I'd been on the depot injections as well. They didn't work. I bled through them.
What is the depot injection?
It's sort of a contraceptive, but it's meant to help alleviate really painful, heavy periods and things. So it's just an injection into your stomach or into your buttocks. And I was on those for a few years. With every new treatment that I would try, I'm thinking, right, I've got to dedicate a whole year of my life to this. And with each of these different treatments that I would try, you're just swapping one set of symptoms for another. So I would be in a lot of pain, I'd be bleeding heavily. They'd say, try this. But then that meant, well, okay, you're not going to be able to conceive for a bit longer, or it would, you might not be bleeding as much, but you're still in pain, and you might now feel a bit nauseous, or you might feel tender or sore boobs, or there was all sorts of different side effects, because they're essentially just messing with your hormones, your natural hormones. So there's always an imbalance, and there's always pros and cons of all these different treatments. So I had the coil fitted after I'd had the third child, and I thought, that might help. And 3 months later, I was going back saying, nothing's changed. I still bleed all day, every day. So in the end, I tried it for 9 months. And I just went back and I said to my gynecologist, I just pretty much said, I know this isn't working. And I said, I know you want me to try it for a year. I said, but it's not making a blind bit of difference. I've got no quality of life. I've got a young baby at home. I've got 2 other children. I need to be functioning better than this. I'm a crap mum. I've got mum guilt because I'm in bed. I'm feeling lousy. I'm bleeding. I'm anemic. He said, right, let's have a look. Tried to have a look at where it was, and he couldn't find the blooming thing. So he's like, it's got lost somewhere. So cue some scans, go for some scans.
What type of scans?
Abdominal and also transvaginal, where they actually look between your legs. So,
okay.
And then he found it, and it was upside down and embedded into the wall of my uterus.
Wow.
So he said, I'm not surprised it's not working. So then they have little strings attached. So he said, I'll try and get it out. So it's got strings on, a bit like a tampon does. And he couldn't get the strings, couldn't find the strings. So then I had to go to theatre, be put to sleep and have it removed surgically. And then I think he said, right, we'll start switching your ovaries off. There's these injections you can have.
Oh, is it the
Prostap and Zoladex?
Wow.
Yeah, so he said, we'll try those with you and give you a bit of a break from the bleeding, because if your ovaries are switched off and not functioning, then you won't have your cycle, you won't have periods and things. Started me on the monthly injections. Again, it's into your stomach, and it's like a little capsule that gets injected, and it slowly releases hormones over the course of a 4-week period. So we would inject it, and then after about a week, you start with all the symptoms of menopause. And at that point, you can start taking back HRT to combat the symptoms of menopause. So it creates a chemical, artificial menopausal state. It tricks your body into thinking you've gone through menopause. Heart palpitations, sweating buckets from head to foot, waking in the night with insomnia, and the bed's dripping, having to change the sheets, and Yes, I wasn't bleeding anymore. Yes, I wasn't having as much pain, but bloody neck. I got smacked in the face with menopause. So, and I said, I'm only getting like 2 weeks where it's actually making a difference. So he said, well, let's try it again for another month. And the same thing happened. So I went on this 3-monthly one then, and it was licensed at the time for a 6-month period. I was put on it multiple times then over the next few years. And even after my 4th child was born and after I've been through hysterectomy, I've been on this since then as well. So, and eventually that's led to me getting osteoporosis. So my bones have thinned that much and have become that weak and rubbish that I'm now like a little old lady. And I have to now take another treatment to counteract the effects that it's had on my bones. And I now have to take that for the rest of my life. And calcium tablets twice a day, every day. And then this horrible medicine every Monday. When my gynecologist looked at me about a year later after I'd had a DEXA scan, he was like, I'm really sorry, you have developed osteoporosis. My husband was like, I knew it. I knew she would. I've been very lucky to have that 4th child, but again, I think I was having surgery every 8 to 12 weeks, and I had 6 operations before we finally got pregnant with him, because by this point in my life, I was bleeding all day, every day. I was permanently anemic on iron tablets, iron transfusions. I was really low energy, really lethargic all the time because I just didn't have enough blood because I was bleeding all the time. With the 3rd child, because the endo was still bad during the pregnancy, and I also developed something called pelvic girdle pain, or SPD, where your pelvis becomes unstable. So I was actually in a wheelchair from about 4.5 months pregnant. As soon as I had my 4th child, my gynecologist had kept saying to me, once you have completed your family, we can do something called an ablation. Now, an ablation is where they take away the lining of the womb. You can't get pregnant after that. So it's only an option for when you have decided you no longer want children or your family is complete. I said, yeah, okay, no problem. And they explained it all to me. They said, they put this wand in and they can either microwave your insides away, or they can burn the lining away, or they can use a balloon method where they fill this balloon with hot water and then that just makes it. There was all different ways of doing it. And he just said, once I open you up, I will know what we're going to do. So I was like, yeah, fine, no problem. And I remember coming out of that surgery and being all over the place, didn't know what my name was, didn't know where I was, looked around me, I was in and out of consciousness. And it turned out that they tried all these different methods of doing this ablation, and one didn't work because my womb was too bulky and baggy. I didn't know what that meant at the time. Then they tried another method, but the neck of my cervix wouldn't close around the instrument they were using. So they had all this drama in theatre trying to do this ablation. And it's the step before a hysterectomy. And they kept saying, no, hysterectomy is a really major surgery. So we will always try this first. And I woke up and I'd lost about 4 days of my life in hospital. And they said there'd been a problem as they were, they tried to burn it, they tried to microwave it. And in the end, they had to just go in and cut it away in the end, because there was no other method to do it. So they cut all the lining of my womb away in the end. As they were finishing the surgery and they were cleaning out my insides with all this surgical fluid, it kept just disappearing. So they're trying to wash my insides out and this fluid just kept disappearing. So it kept filling with more and more of it inside me. And then all the machines started beeping and my kidneys started having a fit. And it transpired that they'd cut into my womb, but then this surgical fluid was just being absorbed by my body. So it was just absorbing through all the cuts that they'd made. It was just sort of soaking it up like a sponge. And then they had to pack my vagina really tightly to stop me from bleeding afterwards. And when my gynecologist came to see me on the ward about 4 days later, I was in agony. I was screaming. I was like, it really hurts down there. It really hurts. He said, right, well, we'll take the packing out now. And I kid you not, it was like that magician when he pulls the multicolored scarf out of his hat. Mm-hmm. You know, they just keep pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling. And there was all this stuff coming out of me. And I was like, oh my God, that's why it hurt so much. There was all that stuff inside me to stop me from bleeding out. And I said to him, you know, aside all of this problems, did it work? And he said, well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is it might work for a little bit, but the bad news is you've got adenomyosis. So as well as the endo, you've got adenomyosis. So I said, right, okay, well, can you fix it? Have you got it all? And he said, oh no, it doesn't work like that. The only cure for adenomyosis is a hysterectomy. So although we were hoping to avoid the hysterectomy by doing this ablation, and it's been awful for you, we've now got to do a hysterectomy anyway. I was like, oh my God, right. So once I'd recovered from that, because I had to have some medication for my kidneys then for the next 3 months because they'd gone all haywire, like I say. And then after that, they said, right, we will book you in for the hysterectomy. So I'd had my baby in the April, and then by the end of the year, I was having the hysterectomy. So I've had the hysterectomy now 11 years ago. Since then, I've had more than 11 surgeries since then. So I've just written some of them down, actually. Yeah.
Wow.
So there is this real misconception that a hysterectomy is a cure for endometriosis. And it isn't. It's a cure for adenomyosis. It is the only cure for adenomyosis. But it doesn't cure the endometriosis. That can still grow. That can still mutate and move around your body. Yes, it's somewhat less likely to happen, but with somebody like myself who's had many surgeries anyway, it's not even about the endometriosis growing back. For me, it's about all the scar tissue that I've got now and all the adhesions I've got, because every time you go in to do a surgery, you are creating more scar tissue. And with me, the scar tissue now is what I have surgery to treat more often than anything else. Because over time, it tightens and tightens and tightens that scar tissue. When it's getting tighter, I can feel everything's pulling. So I have to go and have surgery now and have that crisscrossed. So they make like star shapes into it, and it just frees it up a bit so I can move a bit more freer. So now it's not just that I've got treatment for endo and the knock-on effects of endo on various. It's more for me now about having to keep going in and sorting out the scar tissue and the adhesions that attach to everything else. But every time they go in to treat it, they're creating it another problem for me. So I'm in a really vicious circle now. There's no end in sight. Yeah, sorry. Hang on. After the hysterectomy, I ended up having some excision. I mean, obviously they got the endo while they were doing the hysterectomy because they specifically were looking for it. But since then, I've had recurrent cysts growing on my left ovary to the point where they occur, they burst, and then I'm in agony for 3 or 4 days, and then it takes about 6 weeks for the blood to reabsorb. Sorry, with my hysterectomy, I had what they call a total abdominal hysterectomy. So they took my tubes and they took my cervix, but they left both of my ovaries because I was only 37, and they said, ideally, we need you to still have that natural hormone production from your ovaries to protect you from brittle bone disease and various cancers that they think are more likely once you've gone through menopause. So they said, we want you to keep your ovaries. And I said, that's okay. At the time, I didn't have a lot of problems with them, other than we'd switch them on and off a few times because of the cysts I was getting. But I was very lucky. I had a laparoscopy hysterectomy. It wasn't like a C-section cut or a midline cut. It was just the 4 or 5 little tiny incisions on my abdomen, like I'd had all my previous surgeries, which people at the time were thinking, wow, that's amazing, that's really clever, how did they do it? And essentially they put all the instruments in, and instead of then bringing your womb out intact, they kind of blend it, if you like. Yeah, so they kind of blend all your insides together like you would a handheld mixer, and then they just suck it out. Yeah, wow. But it means it's a quicker recovery than if I'd have had a C-section cut, an abdominal open cut, if you like. So I was really happy. It still took me a long time to recover after that. It's still a major surgery, and it's still a big hit for your body to take all in one go. I kept my ovaries, but then one of them started playing up, like I say, and I kept getting these bursting endometrioma cysts. So I would be in a hell of a lot of pain for 3 or 4 days. It would burst, And then I'd be ill for about sort of 5 or 6 weeks while I was recovering from that. And then I'd just start getting back to normal. And then I'd think, oh, I'm in really severe pain again. And I'd have another one burst. So I was in a cycle of that happening for a while. And then eventually my stomach got really distended and really, really big. I do bloat all the time. And that's just another one of the symptoms of endometriosis, adenomyosis, the problems I have with my bowels. I was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And in the end, it turned out I had quite a huge cyst on the right ovary. We need to get this cyst out. So back to theatre, tried to get the cyst out, couldn't unravel it from my ovary because it had completely overgrown it all. And so I had to have the hysterectomy then. So my right ovary came out at that stage. And then I was all right for a little while. And then I started feeling like I was bending over. And kept going back to my gynae saying, oh, I've got real low down pains again and backache. Let's do a scan, send you for another MRI scan, some more ultrasounds. And then it turned out that the top of my vagina was stuck to my bowel with all the scar tissue and the adhesions. So then back to theatre, had that separated. Each time they have to separate my vagina and my bowel, my vagina has to be shortened by about 1 centimetre. Mm-hmm. So I've had this done a few times now, and each time I'm thinking, oh God, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and so I had that done. And then after that, a prolapse. So because I'd had a hysterectomy, there is now what you're left with is called the vault, and it just means there's a whole empty space in the middle of your abdomen where your womb used to be, and all your organs that are around there, so your intestines, your bowel, your bladder and your vagina, they've got no structural support anymore. There's nothing holding them in place, and over time they can just slip, fall lower and lower. So with me, basically things just fell out. So my vagina started turning inside out, and my bowel and my bladder fell into the gap. So I then had to go in and have real major surgery to repair the prolapse. So I had a rectocele prolapse and I had a cystocele prolapse. So that's my front passage and my back passage, basically. I ended up having a new poop chute, if you like, and I ended up having a designer vagina. Oh. So that was that repaired, and the actual recovery from that surgery was the most horrific recovery I've had from all the surgeries prior to that. It was just awful. The pain was incredible. I can't tell you. That was awful. I was in a really bad way after.
I feel like if you have both of them done at the same time, if you need to empty your bowel or
exactly
go to that must hurt.
It really did hurt.
Every time,
nothing like after I'd given birth, nothing like any of the surgeries I'd had before. And like you say, those natural bodily functions were just crippling. I'd be laying there, I'd be crouched in a bath of hot water trying to go to the toilet, and I would be screaming and crying. It was awful.
What type of pain relief did you have?
Yeah, at that point I was on cocodamols, tramadols, Oromorph, all sorts of nerve blockers, just everything you could throw at me, I would just take it. Forgot to mention, when they removed the cyst on the right ovary, I woke up and I couldn't feel my right leg after that surgery, and it transpired that they'd accidentally cut through my lateral femoral cutaneous nerve running through my abdomen and down to my right leg, so I couldn't feel my leg at all.
Accidentally?
There are risks. Everything is, when everything's twisted and stuck together and wrapped around, and I guess, there are risks, and I know there are risks, but yeah, I woke up and couldn't feel my leg. And so then I've had 2 nerve repair surgeries. And honestly, my body is like somebody's played noughts and crosses on my abdomen. And after them, I had huge hematomas and swellings, and then I've had to have months of surgery with a special nerve clinic. So after the nerve surgery, which is in sort of my right hand side groin, so I've got a big scar in there. It wasn't just flat, there was a mound, a huge mound, and a big swelling underneath. And at one point they actually thought they were going to have to go in and release it all and cut that out, but they said that might cause me more problems. So I had to go and have, like I say, specialist and physio for the best part of a year, because this nerve has been damaged. I've just got pain. My leg was on fire. It was either burning, stabbing, pins and needles. I couldn't have anything touching my leg. I couldn't wear tights, trousers, jeans. My husband got me a little cage that goes in the bed so that it would go over my leg in the bed because I couldn't have the duvet touching me. I had these lidocaine patches I would stick to my leg. It's like a long-acting local anaesthetic, trying to give the pain a different stimulus. So I've had years and years of nerve pain now, and I regularly now go and have something called chili heat patch treatment on it, where patch cut to size that's full of just chili peppers basically, and you strap it on for an hour and then you grit your teeth and it burns and stings like hell. But each time you go and have that done, the aim of it is to stimulate the nerve in a different way to the pain that it's always feeling and eventually shrink that area of pain. And my nerve apparently will grow back at about a centimetre every 2 years or something like that. So eventually it should grow back.
Wow.
But right now, that I still have a whole area around my right knee that's just awfully painful. But the rest of it has lessened over the years. I take a lot of nerve medication now to help with that. So as I was saying before, one thing leads to another. There's always a different set of symptoms and a knock-on effect. And I think I have just been very unlucky. You do go to that point where you think, God, why me? And you go down that rabbit hole of thinking it's not fair. Why is it always me? And you do get depressed. You know, I went through, after I lost the feeling in my leg, I went through a really, really low point and I ended up just in tears all the time. I was really feeling sorry for myself, basically. And I know there are worse things going on in the world. My God, there are. But I was really low. And that's when I stopped working, when I said to my husband, I need to go and see a doctor. I need something to help me get out of this hole I'm in. Yeah. So I started on antidepressants then and still on them to this day. I don't think I'll ever not be able to take them because they made me feel like me again. But again, that took a lot of messing about with and probably a year to get on top of, out of that horrible, horrible place I was in. And at the time, more surgeries, crisscrossing the adhesions. I had another vagina and bowel separation. Oh yeah, then one day I was really struggling to pee. So my bladder and my bowels are always in a mess because of all the surgeries I've had in that area and touching on them and bowel shaves. And I'm either always constipated or got diarrhea. It's never a nice normal poop. It's always one or the other. So I kept thinking, oh, it's hurting when I'm trying to go to the toilet again. And I was thinking I may have been another prolapse. And then eventually I couldn't pee. So I ended up, again, my stomach swelling and swelling and swelling. And I went to see my gynae and he was like, oh yeah, the adhesions have grown over your urethras, the little tubes that you pee down. All the adhesions have grown over and closed them. So then I had to have something called bladder stricture surgery, where they opened up my tubes again. I think he said they sort of blow into them almost with a machine and they open them up again and take all the adhesions off and open them up and then repair them where the little holes are and things. So I had that done. After that, I thought, God, please give me a bit of a breather. And I started getting really bad problems with my head. I started getting head pain and one-sided headaches and vision blurring and then losing the feeling down this right arm and my fingers. And God, this is really weird, not something else. And my husband's like, oh God, what else is it? It's not your stomach, it's not your back, it's not your bowel, it's not your bladder, it's your neck now. So I've started having some investigations on my neck because I had a few times where I ended up in an ambulance and having to have morphine and stuff because my neck was really hurting. So I had some MRI scans on my neck and they looked at them afterwards and they said, you've completely worn out the discs in your neck. And they were like, how have you done that at your age? And I said, I know exactly what it is. I said, is it because I've spent 20 years curled up with stomach ache and gynae pain, rocking and hot water bottles? And they said, yeah, that'll be it. And I'd worn the discs out in my neck. So then I had to go and have major surgery on my neck and I've had 2 discs taken out. They went through the front, so I've got another beautiful scar. So they went through the front, if you can see.
Yeah. Wow.
So they replaced two and they fused them together. And I've now got carbon fibre and titanium plates and bolts and stuff in my neck. Unfortunately now, fast forward 5 years, I've now got another two, the one above and below, now need doing as well. But they did say to me at the time, once we've done these two, it puts pressure on the ones above and below. I mean, they weren't in a great state anyway, but they said we can't fuse 4 in a row because you won't be able to turn your head, you will lose your range of movement, you can't drive a car anymore, blah, blah, blah. So that's where I'm at the moment. I'm having injections in my neck again and all sorts of stuff to try and prolong me having this more surgery. After I had my neck done, I got frozen shoulder and I couldn't lift my shoulder because they'd messed around with the nerves here. It had affected my shoulder. So then I've had my shoulder reconstructed but again, that was keyhole, so that was nice and neat. And then I've had more gynae surgeries and eventually started getting recurring cysts that would burst. And so I've recently, just a year ago, had my one remaining ovary removed. So I'm now hit surgical menopause. So like overnight surgical menopause, hot sweats, flushes, all the rest of it. And because I've got osteoporosis, I can only have a particular type of HRT, the one that will protect my bones. But because that one is very heavily estrogen based, estrogen is what feeds endo. So I'm at risk now of getting more endo growing back because of the HRT that I'm needing to take. But it's a toss up between what's going to protect my bones and what potentially might give me endo. Then I have to protect my bones. And my surgeon said that's the most important. So yes, you might get this happening, but we have to do this. So
it's never ending and it's not going to be cured.
No.
So you
no. There's
having
no
surgeries.
Yeah, but mostly to treat the scarring and the adhesions that keep tightening up, and then I need them freeing up.
Wow.
But then those adhesions stick various bits of me together. They freeze my pelvis and stick different bits together at different points. So yeah, I just keep going back. But I see a gastroenterologist regularly. I've got connective tissue disorder, so I see a rheumatologist. I've got a pain management consultant. I've got my neurosurgeons for my neck. So I've obviously got my gynecologist. Honestly, just so many doctors, so many medications, which takes me to this. You probably wouldn't believe me if I just told you this, so I had to document it, and I will take a photo and send you afterwards. Every day, I take a minimum of 32 medications.
A day?
A day. So I've written it all down.
Yeah.
And I will send that to you. So every day I take 32 doses of medication, between 32 and 36. On a Monday, when I have to take the alendronic acid, it's a minimum of 33 doses of medicine. And then on a really bad day, if I have to add in the Oromorph or the esomeprazole, if I get like heartburn, then it can go up to 46 doses of medicine a day. And that's just for me to get out of bed, be sat here talking to you and functioning to look after my children. I'm permanently attached to a hot water bottle. I have all sorts of things to help me these days. I've got my disabled badge, my blue badge. I get free transport in Greater Manchester because I'm disabled. I have this access card, which again shows people I'm disabled and I can't queue up for long and can't stand up for long, need access to a toilet. I've got a bladder and bowel community card, which is called the Just Can't Wait card, which means if I'm out and about and I desperately get the urge to go to the toilet, I can quickly just flash that card at somebody and say, I really need the toilet. I've got a radar key, which opens up public toilets that are closed to members of the public and things. So I'm doing everything that I can to help myself, if you like, because this isn't going away. It's something that I have to live with, and I have to learn to live with and make my life as easy as I possibly can.
Well, you are
So
actually
yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot of surgery. It's the first time I've heard of that much surgery.
I know, it's crazy. And so when COVID happened, everybody was obviously very isolated. And once COVID had sort of gone away again, I thought, I want to get out there again. I want to meet people. I want to help people who have felt like me with this problem and all the different gynae problems: adenomyosis, endometriosis, heavy periods, fibroids, polycystic ovaries, infertility problem, all that kind of stuff. I was like, I just want to get people together and help and let them know that they're not alone, because like you said earlier, there's so many people don't know about this. So I got together with a couple of ladies that I'd met online, and we decided to set up our own little WhatsApp support group for Greater Manchester. So we started that in like, I don't know, a few years ago now, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And now we have got about 40 ladies in the group, and it's mostly an online community. We just chat and throw ideas around and talk about medications or how we're feeling and what they might be able to do to help. Or, we try and meet up once a month and get together face to face and just have a coffee. But we sit in a coffee shop and we've all got our hot water bottles and we all just chat and keep each other sane, basically. I forgot to tell you, I was part of a body painting awareness raising event. I've been on the radio, I've talked about endometriosis on the radio, and I've done this body painting event where 10 ladies, we stripped off, we bared all, and we had our bodies painted head to toe, images that depicted how we feel about our endo. And it was a real empowering thing, because I have such body dysmorphia. I just feel like my body is a giant bruise. I just feel bruised, I feel battered, everything hurts all the time. It's not just in your abdomen. This woman said it will make you look differently at your body and it will just really empower you. And it's the people who've got endometriosis, give it a try. I'm going to do that because it would be really nice to see my body differently. We sat down with all these artists and we talked about feeling battered and bruised and like barbed wire ripping us and vines and lightning striking us and all these different types of pains at different times. And I said, I always like to have a positive outlook though and think, it might be a storm, but there might be a rainbow afterwards, and you've got to keep thinking there's better days and keep hoping that there's going to be a cure eventually, or there's going to be a treatment that works or that suits me. So the artist went away. So I chose predominantly rainbow design. So my right leg is painted with a bruise. So I'm all black and blue and purple. And then there's a vine wrapping around it and gripping my leg, bolts of lightning flashing all over my body and all down my back. At one point, I was likening the endo to a wildflower, and I was explaining that, how you'll see little flowers growing up in between the cracks of your pavement and things.
What's your advice to people who are going through this?
Honestly, don't think you're alone. There is help out there. You won't be signposted to that help. It's up to you to seek it out, which isn't right. It's really wrong. I believe there should be posters up in GP surgeries and in gynae units at hospitals, and for people to know there is support. But yeah, try and do some research. Try and look at where you can find help. Find yourself a good gynecologist. Get yourself to a good endo centre, BSDCE centre, because that's where the best specialists are. Get online, do your research and advocate for yourself. Don't take, no, it's just a bad period off anybody. You've got to keep advocating for yourself, because nobody else will. You've got to keep putting it back on them, saying, this is happening, it's not changed, what next? What are you going to do to help me? And don't just give me pain relief or a medication that's going to mask the symptoms. I want to know what the actual problem is and get to the root of the problem, and then sort me out with, how to mitigate it. It's hard. It is hard, because when you're feeling rubbish and you're, in bed a long time and you're feeling sorry for yourself and you just want to look after your families potentially, or go to work, see your friends, it's hard, because then you've got to have a battle on your hands to fight the doctors, and it does take all your strength. But you have to find it in yourself to do that, to be able to do that. I've lost so many friends over the years who think I'm being flaky because, we make plans and then I can't go. I can be feeling fine, and then 10 minutes before I'm due to head out the door, I can be doubled up, rolling around in agony and letting people down. And I've missed weddings, I've missed funerals, I've missed christenings, I've missed 30th birthdays, 40th birthdays. And, you know, people don't like that, but I'm not making this up. This is how my life is. And so when we do this monthly sort of get together with the endo group, totally understand if 15 people are meant to be coming and only 3 turn up. The nature of our disease, yeah. You just suddenly get struck with it, and then you don't know if it's going to last an hour, a few hours, a few days. It is really debilitating, incurable disease, and it just floors you. And don't, you know, if somebody tells you they've got it this bad, it just means so much for just that 1 or 2 friends or family members to believe you and to not question it and to have your back and support you, come along to your doctor's appointments if you want them to, and fight your case for you. But just to be believed is a big deal. It makes a big difference just to be believed and supported.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing the story with us. Remember, you're not alone. If you're going through similar symptoms, make sure you reach out. Thank you so much for listening to this show. If you like this show, like what we're doing here, and you want to support us, there's a free way to do so by hitting the subscribe button. If you're struggling and you want to share your story, please check out the link in the description. And I will promise to do my best to create awareness for the condition that people are suffering silently. Thank you, and see you next time.